The flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror caught him by surprise. James checked his speedometer. He was certain he hadn't been speeding. He'd been extra careful since getting his car serviced last week. With a sigh, he signaled and pulled over to the curb, the police cruiser stopping behind him. James did everything by the book, just like his father had taught him years ago. He turned down the music, rolled down his window, placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen, and waited. In his rearview mirror, he could see an officer approaching, one hand resting near his holster, a tall man with broad shoulders and a rigid posture. "License and registration," the officer said, not bothering with a greeting. His nameplate read, "Brennan." "Good evening, officer," James said politely. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" Officer Brennan's face remained impassive. "License and registration first," James nodded. "I'm going to reach for my wallet in my back pocket, and my registration is in the glove compartment." The officer gave a curt nod, and James moved slowly, retrieving his license and then carefully opening the glove compartment for his registration. He handed both items to Officer Brennan. As the officer examined the documents, James noticed two teenagers across the street slowing down, watching the scene unfold. One of them had their phone out, probably recording. It was just the way things were these days. "Officer, I'm still wondering why I was pulled over," James said, his voice calm and respectful. Brennan's jaw tightened. "You were doing 47 in a 35 zone." James frowned slightly. That didn't sound right. He'd been watching his speed carefully, especially in this neighborhood where the limits changed frequently. "I'm sorry, but I don't think I was speeding." "Would it be possible to see the radar reading?" Something in Officer Brennan's expression changed, a hardening around the eyes, a slight flush creeping up his neck. "Are you saying I'm lying?" "No, sir," James replied quickly. "I'm just confused because I was being careful about my speed. I thought perhaps there was a misunderstanding." By now, a small red sedan had pulled up behind the police cruiser. A woman got out and stood by her car, her phone clearly visible in her hand. On the sidewalk, an older man walking his dog had stopped to watch. "Step out of the vehicle," Officer Brennan ordered suddenly. James blinked in surprise. "Have I done something wrong, officer?" "I said step out of the vehicle." Brennan's voice rose, his hand moving to rest on his belt near his holster. James felt his heart rate picking up. This wasn't how routine traffic stops were supposed to go. He'd been nothing but polite. "Am I being detained?" "I'd just like to understand what's happening." "You're questioning my authority, that's what's happening," Brennan snapped. "Now get out of the car before I make you get out." James took a deep breath, trying to stay calm despite the growing knot of anxiety in his stomach. More people had gathered now. A couple had stopped their evening walk to observe from across the street. A delivery driver had parked his truck and was standing nearby, phone raised. "I'm not trying to question your authority," James explained, his voice still level despite his racing heart. "I just want to understand why a simple traffic stop is escalating this way." The words had barely left his mouth when Officer Brennan's hand shot out, grabbing James's shirt collar and yanking him toward the open window. "You think you're smart? You think you know the law better than me?" "I'm not resisting," James said, his hand still visible on the steering wheel. "There's no need for this. Get out of the car," Brennan shouted, his face now inches from James's. He reached for the door handle and yanked it open. James slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. "I'm complying, officer. Please don't touch me again." That was when it happened. As James began to step out of the car, Officer Brennan grabbed him by the shoulder and roughly pulled him forward. James stumbled slightly, regaining his balance and standing up straight. "I have rights," James said firmly. The officer's face twisted with anger. His arm swung in a wide arc and the back of his hand connected with James's face with a sickening sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent street. The force of the blow sent James staggering backward until he fell to the pavement, his hand instinctively reaching up to touch his stinging cheek and split lip. Gasps and shouts erupted from the onlookers. The woman from the red sedan yelled, "I got that on video!" The older man with the dog was already on his phone, apparently calling 911. James tasted blood in his mouth as he looked up at Officer Brennan from the ground. "This is being recorded," he said quietly. "Everyone is watching." It was as if a switch had been flipped. Officer Brennan looked around, suddenly aware of the crowd that had gathered, at least 7 or 8 people, most with phones pointed directly at him. His face, which had been flushed with anger seconds before, now drained of color. He assaulted that man for no reason, someone shouted. "I'm calling the police on the police," another voice called out. James slowly sat up, his head spinning slightly from the blow. He could feel his cheek beginning to swell. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. Officer Brennan took a step back, his hand moving from his holster to run through his hair in a nervous gesture. You resisted," he muttered, but the confidence was gone from his voice. "That's a lie," the delivery driver called out. "He was cooperating." "We all saw it." James carefully got to his feet, using the car door for support. His legs felt shaky, adrenaline coursing through his system. He looked directly at Officer Brennan, noticing how the man's eyes now darted around, looking at the phones, the witnesses, anywhere but at James. "I want your badge number," James said calmly, "and I want your supervisor here now." More police sirens wailed in the distance. Someone's 911 call had gotten through. Officer Brennan's radio crackled with a dispatcher's voice asking for a status update. He didn't respond, still seemingly frozen in place as the reality of what he'd done sank in. A young woman stepped forward from the gathering crowd. "Are you okay?" she asked James. "I'm a nurse. That's a nasty cut on your lip." "Thank you," James said. He pressed the back of his hand to his lip and winced when it came away bloody. The woman glared at Officer Brennan. "You should be ashamed of yourself." Officer Brennan's radio crackled again, louder this time. A voice demanded a response. Finally, he reached for it with a slightly trembling hand. "This is Brennan. Situation. Situation under control. Need additional units." "Under control?" The delivery driver laughed bitterly. "You just assaulted an innocent man." James leaned against his car, feeling the adrenaline starting to wear off, replaced by the throbbing pain in his face. He knew this wasn't over, far from it. But in this moment, watching Officer Brennan's growing realization that he had made a terrible mistake in full view of multiple witnesses, James felt a strange calm settle over him. 2 more police cars pulled up, lights flashing. The officers stepped out, looking confused at the scene, the gathered crowd with phones raised, James bleeding, and Officer Brennan standing there looking suddenly smaller than he had just minutes ago. "What happened here?" one of the new officers asked, approaching cautiously. Before Officer Brennan could speak, several voices from the crowd called out at once. "He hit him! We've got it all on video. That officer assaulted this man." The new officers exchanged glances, clearly trying to assess the situation. One of them approached James. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" James nodded. "I think I do, and I'd like to file a formal complaint." As the officer radioed for an ambulance, James noticed Officer Brennan being taken aside by the other officer, their conversation happening in urgent whispers. Brennan's face had gone from angry to pale to a sickly gray color, as the enormity of what he'd done and the consequences he might face began to dawn on him. The nurse who had stepped forward earlier handed James a clean tissue for his bleeding lip. "You know," she said quietly, "all those videos are probably already online. This isn't going to just go away." James nodded, watching as Officer Brennan glanced over at him with what almost looked like the beginning of fear in his eyes. "No," James agreed. "It's definitely not going away. I've written part 1 of the story in approximately 1,400 words as requested. The narrative focuses on the initial traffic stop and confrontation between James Wilson and Officer Brennan, using simple language and a natural tone throughout. The story is human-centric and builds tension gradually, showing how a routine traffic stop escalates into a serious incident. I've avoided any overly violent content while still conveying the seriousness of the situation. The narrative includes realistic bystander reactions and sets up the power shift that will occur later in the story. Meanwhile, the scene around them had transformed. What started as a handful of witnesses had grown into a small crowd, with neighbors emerging from nearby homes to see what was happening. Phones were everywhere, recording every moment. Some people were already showing others video clips of the incident, their faces tight with anger. The supervising officer, a lieutenant named Dawkins according to his nameplate, approached James after a brief but tense conversation with Officer Brennan. "Mr. Wilson, I want to assure you we're taking this very seriously," Lieutenant Dawkins said. His voice was measured, but his eyes kept darting to the recording phones around them. We'll need your statement, but please get medical attention first. James nodded, wincing as the paramedic applied a butterfly bandage to his lip as a temporary measure. I want to press charges, he said clearly. Lieutenant Dawkins hesitated, then gave a tight nod. That's your right, sir. Across the street, James could see Officer Brennan standing by his patrol car, another officer beside him. Brennan's posture had changed completely. Gone was the aggressive stance, replaced by slumped shoulders and a pale face. He kept glancing over at James, then quickly looking away when their eyes met. We need to transport you to the hospital, the male paramedic told James. Is there anyone you'd like us to call? My sister, James replied, giving them her number. Her name is Tanya. As the paramedics prepared to load him into the ambulance, the delivery driver who had been recording stepped forward. Hey, I'm Pete, he said, offering his hand to James. I got everything on video clear as day. Already backed it up to the cloud, too. You need it, just let me know. James shook his hand. Thank you, Pete, I appreciate that. Already got 5 messages from news stations wanting the footage, Pete added, lowering his voice. This is blowing up, man. Before James could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Tanya. OMG, James, are you okay? Your face is all over Twitter. I'm coming to the hospital right now. James looked up in surprise. The incident had happened less than 30 minutes ago. How was it already online? But of course, that's how things work now. Seconds to film, seconds to upload, seconds for the world to see. Lieutenant Dawkins approached again. Mr. Wilson, we'll need to get your formal statement later. Is tomorrow morning all right? We can come to you. That's fine, James replied, now feeling the full throbbing pain in his cheek and lip. But I want my lawyer present. The lieutenant's expression tightened slightly, but he nodded. Of course, that's your right. As the paramedics helped James into the ambulance, he caught a final glimpse of Officer Brennan. The man was being directed into the back seat of a police car, not handcuffed, but clearly no longer in control of the situation. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment James saw something unexpected in Brennan's expression. Fear. The hospital emergency room was busy, but James was taken in quickly. The doctor who examined him, Dr. Chen according to her badge, was thorough and kind. The good news is no concussion, she said after completing her examination. The bad news is you'll need 6 stitches for your lip, and you're going to have quite a bruise on your cheekbone. Any pain in your jaw when you move it? James moved his jaw experimentally and winced. A little. We'll take some x-rays to be safe, Dr. Chen said, making notes in his chart. Has anyone from the hospital asked about filing a police report? James explained that he'd already spoken with police at the scene. I see, Dr. Chen said, her expression carefully neutral. Well, we'll document your injuries thoroughly. That can be important later. The x-rays confirm no fractures, just bruising. As a nurse was finishing up the stitches on his lip, Tanya burst into the treatment room, her eyes wide with worry. James, she cried, rushing to his side. I can't believe this happened to you. The nurse finished the last stitch and stepped back. I'll give you 2 a moment, she said, drawing the privacy curtain as she left. Tanya took out her phone and showed James what she'd been seeing online. The video of Officer Brennan striking him had been shared thousands of times already. News sites were picking up the story. A justice for James was trending. It's everywhere, she said. People are furious. There's already a protest forming outside the police station. James stared at the screen, watching himself fall to the pavement. It was surreal, like watching something happen to someone else. This is crazy, he murmured. Crazy? It's about time, Tanya said, her voice fierce. You didn't do anything wrong. All those people saw it. And you know what else they're saying online? She scrolled through comments. Someone recognized you from that community board you sit on. The Police Oversight Committee. The irony is not lost on people. James closed his eyes briefly. He'd almost forgotten about his position on the Civilian Police Oversight Committee. He'd only joined 6 months ago, hoping to help improve community police relations. Now he was at the center of exactly the kind of incident the committee was meant to address. His phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. He answered cautiously. Mr. Wilson, this is Diane Powell from the mayor's office. The mayor would like to speak with you personally about the incident today. Before James could respond, another call beeped in. A local news station. Then another notification. An email from the police chief's office requesting a meeting. His social media notifications were exploding with messages of support from friends, colleagues, and strangers. "This is insane," he said to Tanya after declining the calls. "I just wanted to go home after work." Tanya squeezed his hand. "I know, but maybe this happened for a reason. Who better to be at the center of this than someone who actually knows about police oversight?" A soft knock at the door interrupted them. A tall man in a suit stood there holding a business card. "Mr. Wilson? I'm Richard Thompson, civil rights attorney. I heard about what happened and came right over. I'd like to offer my services." Before James could answer, Dr. Chen returned with discharge papers. "You're free to go, Mr. Wilson. Take these pain medications as needed and come back in 10 days to have the stitches removed." As they prepared to leave, a hospital administrator approached nervously. "Mr. Wilson, I should warn you, there are reporters outside. We can take you out through a staff entrance if you prefer." James considered this, then shook his head. "No need. I have nothing to hide." Sure enough, as they exited the hospital, camera flashes erupted and reporters called out questions. James walked steadily, Tanya's arm linked through his, the attorney Mr. Thompson walking beside them. He didn't stop or answer questions, but he didn't hide his face either. Let them see what Officer Brennan had done. As they drove away in Tanya's car, his phone rang again. This time it was Lieutenant Dawkins. "Mr. Wilson, I wanted to update you personally. Officer Brennan has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. We're also reviewing body cam footage and witness statements." "What about his previous record?" James asked, remembering something from his police oversight committee training. "Any prior complaints?" There was a pause on the line. "That's part of the investigation," Lieutenant Dawkins said carefully. After hanging up, James turned to the attorney who had joined them in the car. "I want to see Officer Brennan's personnel file. I want to know if there have been other complaints." Thompson nodded. "We can file a formal request. Based on what happened today, we might have grounds to get that information." Back at James's apartment, Tanya helped him get settled, while Thompson laid out potential legal options. The story continued to explode online. More footage emerged from different angles, all showing the same thing. James being respectful, Brennan escalating, then the unprovoked strike. "Look at this," Tanya said, showing James her phone. Someone had dug up a photo of James receiving an award for his volunteer work with at-risk youth last year. Side by side with the image of him bleeding on the pavement, it made for a powerful contrast. James's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Officer Brennan's union rep. He would like to speak with you privately. Please call this number." James showed the message to Thompson, who shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. No private conversations. Everything goes through proper channels." As night fell, James stood by his apartment window looking out at the city lights. His face throbbed with pain, but that wasn't what kept him awake. He was thinking about Officer Brennan's face in that moment of realization, when he understood that his actions had consequences, that the power he thought he held absolutely was actually conditional. James's phone buzzed with another notification. The police chief had issued a statement. "The behavior seen in the video does not reflect our department's values or training. We are committed to a full investigation and appropriate action." Tanya, reading over his shoulder, snorted. "Standard damage control?" "Maybe," James said quietly. "But this feels different somehow." And it did feel different. Because for once, James wasn't alone in this fight. He had witnesses, video evidence, public support, legal representation, and most importantly, a position from which he could push for real change. His phone buzzed again. A text from Pete, the delivery driver. "News says Brennan tried to claim you were resisting, but his own body cam footage contradicts him. They're saying he's changed his story 3 times already." "He's scared, man." James set down the phone. Tomorrow would bring meetings, statements, decisions. But tonight, in this quiet moment, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope that perhaps justice might actually be possible. "I've written part 2 of the story, continuing the narrative from the aftermath of the incident through James's medical treatment and the beginning of the public reaction. The story shows how quickly the incident gains attention and how the power dynamic begins to shift as evidence mounts against Officer Brennan. This section introduces new characters like James's sister, Tanya, attorney Richard Thompson, and medical professionals, while continuing to develop the central conflict. I've maintained a human-centered approach with natural dialogue and realistic reactions to the situation. The pacing builds tension while giving readers emotional moments to connect with James as he processes what's happening. Tanya had slept on his couch, insisting she wouldn't leave him alone. Now she appeared in his bedroom doorway, already dressed and holding 2 cups of coffee. "Morning, famous brother," she said, handing him a cup. "How's the face?" James touched his swollen cheek gingerly. "Feels like I got hit by a truck." "Well, you look like it too," she said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Your lawyer called twice and the mayor's office again. Oh, and the police chief wants a meeting at 10. James took a careful sip of coffee, wincing as it touched his stitched lip. "What time is the lieutenant coming for my statement?" 9, with some internal affairs guy. Tanya scrolled through her phone. "And you're not going to believe this, they've suspended Brennan without pay." "That almost never happens this fast." James raised his eyebrows. "Really?" "Yeah, and there's more." She turned her phone to show him a news article. Someone leaked parts of Brennan's personnel file. "This isn't his first rodeo, James. There are 3 previous complaints of excessive force against black men, all dismissed. But now reporters are tracking down those men for interviews." James set his coffee down and took the phone, reading through the article. The system usually protected officers like Brennan, burying complaints and making it nearly impossible for victims to get justice. Something was different this time. "The video," he murmured. "It's because everyone saw it happen," Tanya nodded. "Over 2 million views now. It's gone national." By 8:30, James had showered and dressed in his most professional suit, navy blue with a light blue shirt, no tie because of the bandages on his face. His attorney, Richard Thompson, arrived early, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing an expression of determined focus. "We're in a strong position," Thompson said as they reviewed what James would say in his statement. "Multiple videos, multiple witnesses, his body cam footage, his history of complaints, and your spotless record. The department is in damage control mode." The lieutenant arrived precisely at 9, accompanied by a serious-looking woman who introduced herself as Captain Rivera from Internal Affairs. They sat in James's living room, the formal statement process beginning with recording devices set up and permissions requested. "Just tell us exactly what happened. In your own words," Lieutenant Dawkins said. James recounted the events calmly and precisely, from the moment he was pulled over until the ambulance arrived. He didn't embellish or exaggerate. He didn't need to. The truth was damning enough. When he finished, Captain Rivera leaned forward. "Mr. Wilson, are you aware that Officer Brennan claims you made threatening movements and resisted his commands?" Thompson started to object, but James raised a hand. "I'm aware of that claim, yes. I'm also aware that multiple videos and his own body cam footage show otherwise." Captain Rivera nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yes, we've reviewed all available footage. Your account aligns with the video evidence. When they left, Thompson stayed behind." "They're building a case against him, not you," he said, sounding almost surprised. "That's unusual, to say the least." James straightened his jacket, preparing for his next meeting. "What's unusual is that they got caught in a lie they can't wiggle out of." The police headquarters was surrounded by protesters when James arrived for his meeting with the police chief. People held signs reading "Justice for James" and "Police Accountability Now." A chant started as James and Thompson walked toward the entrance. "We saw what you did." "We saw what you did." Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Officers glanced at James, then quickly looked away. The chief's secretary led them to a conference room rather than the chief's office, a larger space where several people were already waiting: the police chief, the mayor, the city attorney, and 2 members of the city council. "Mr. Wilson," the chief said, standing to shake James's hand. "Thank you for coming. How are you feeling?" "I've been better," James replied honestly. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. The officials expressed their deep concern and commitment to justice. They discussed police training, department policies, and community relations. James listened more than he spoke, noting how carefully everyone chose their words, how aware they were of the political implications. "We want to make this right," the mayor said finally. "We're prepared to offer a settlement." "I'm not interested in a settlement that comes with confidentiality clauses," James interrupted. "This isn't about money for me." The city attorney looked pained. "Mr. Wilson, I understand your perspective, but—" "No, I don't think you do," James said, his voice quiet but firm. I sit on the Civilian Police Oversight Committee. For months we've been pushing for reforms that your office has blocked. Body cameras that can't be turned off. Independent review of excessive force complaints. Transparency in officer disciplinary records. Real consequences for violations. He gestured to his injured face. If it takes this to make you listen, then at least something good can come from it. The room fell silent. Finally, the police chief spoke. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Wilson? As James outlined his conditions, policy changes, enhanced training, and a commitment to transparency, Thompson passed him a note. Channel 7 breaking news. Officer Brennan held press conference. Claimed department throwing him under the bus. Walked off when reporter asked about previous complaints. After the meeting, James stepped outside to find the crowd of protesters had grown. When they saw him, a cheer went up. Someone shouted, "Tell us what happened in there, James." Thompson whispered, "You don't have to speak to them." But James approached the gathered crowd. News cameras turned toward him. Phones were raised to record. He spoke without prepared remarks, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet gathering. "I went into that meeting as a member of this community who was wronged," he said. "But I also went in as someone who believes change is possible. The department has committed to reviewing their use of force policies. They've agreed to make officer disciplinary records accessible to the public. And Officer Brennan will face consequences for his actions." The crowd cheered, but James raised his hand. "This isn't about one officer or one incident. It's about a system that needs to change. And change only happens when we all demand it, consistently, peacefully, and with determination." As James stepped away from the impromptu press conference, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Diane from Channel 5 News. Officer Brennan is requesting an interview with you present. He says he wants to apologize publicly. Please call to discuss." James showed the message to Thompson, who shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. This is a trap. He's trying to salvage his career." But James wasn't so sure. He remembered Brennan's face in that moment when he realized he'd been caught. The fear, yes, but also something else. Shame, perhaps. Back at his apartment, James found Tanya engaged in a heated phone call. She ended it quickly when she saw him. "How did it go?" "Better than expected," James said, loosening his tie. "They're actually listening." "Well, while you were gone, Brennan's union rep called again." "And his mother?" James blinked in surprise. "His mother?" Tanya nodded, her expression softening slightly. "She was crying. Said her son has never been in trouble before joining the force. Said he was a good kid who got caught up in a culture that changed him." James sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried him through the day was fading, leaving him aware of every ache in his body. "What did you tell her?" "That you'd call her back," Tanya admitted. "I couldn't just shut her down, James. She sounded heartbroken." Before James could respond, his phone rang again. Thompson this time. "Turn on Channel 5, he said without preamble. James grabbed the remote and flipped to the channel. Officer Brennan was on screen, standing at a podium. His police uniform was gone, replaced by a plain dark suit. He looked smaller somehow, his face drawn and pale. "Want to apologize to Mr. Wilson and to the community," Brennan was saying, his voice unsteady. "My actions were inexcusable. I've spent 7 years on the force, and somewhere along the way, I lost sight of why I became an officer in the first place." The camera cut to the reporter. "Officer Brennan, some are saying your apology is too little, too late, especially in light of previous complaints against you. Your response?" The camera returned to Brennan, who looked directly into the lens. "Those complaints should have been warning signs. To me and to the department. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm acknowledging I failed in my duty, and I accept whatever consequences come my way." James muted the TV, turning to Tanya with a puzzled expression. "Is this real? Or is he just trying to save his job?" Tanya shrugged. "Maybe both?" "People are complicated, James." James's phone buzzed with another text, this one from Captain Rivera. "Brennan has officially been terminated from the department. Criminal charges being considered. DA's office would like your cooperation." Outside his apartment window, James could hear distant chanting from protesters still gathered downtown. His face throbbed with pain. His coffee table was covered with business cards from reporters and legal documents from Thompson. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from friends, colleagues, and strangers expressing support. 3 days ago, He had been an ordinary software engineer driving home from work. Now he was at the center of a movement. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, not just for his own justice, but for the changes that might prevent this from happening to someone else. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. James answered cautiously. Mr. Wilson? A hesitant male voice. This is Michael Brennan. I've written part 3 of the story, covering the day after the incident when the situation begins to rapidly evolve. This section follows James as he gives his official statement, meets with city officials, and witnesses the growing public response to the incident. The narrative shows how the power dynamics continue to shift as evidence mounts against Officer Brennan in public. Pressure forces officials to take action. I've added complexity by introducing Brennan's mother and his public apology, raising questions about his motivations and the possibility of genuine remorse. Mr. Wilson, are you there? Brennan's voice sounded different on the phone, smaller, less confident than the booming commands he'd shouted during their encounter. I'm here, James said finally. How did you get this number? My mother, Brennan admitted. She said she spoke with your sister. Look, I know you probably don't want to talk to me. You're right about that, James interrupted, his free hand unconsciously touching the stitches on his lip. My attorney advised against any direct contact. I understand, Brennan said quickly. I just wanted to say directly to you what I said on TV. I'm sorry. What I did was wrong, completely wrong. James closed his eyes, torn between anger and curiosity. Was this genuine remorse or just damage control? Why did you do it? He asked suddenly. Why did you hit me? There was a long pause on the line. I could give you excuses, Brennan said finally. Talk about stress or training or the culture. But the truth is simpler and worse. In that moment I was angry that you questioned me, and I thought I could get away with it. I've seen others get away with worse. The raw honesty of the admission caught James off guard. He'd expected deflection or carefully worded apologies crafted by a union representative. You've done this before, James said. It wasn't a question. Not exactly like this, Brennan said after a moment. But I've been rougher than necessary. Intimidated people. Used my badge as a shield. His voice cracked slightly. The department is pulling all my stops from the last 3 years. There's a pattern. Tanya, who had moved closer to try to hear the conversation, raised her eyebrows in surprise. Why are you telling me this? James asked. You know this could be used against you if the DA files charges. Because I'm done hiding behind badges and unions and thin blue lines, Brennan replied. My mother raised me better than this. When she saw that video, his voice trailed off. Anyway, I won't take up any more of your time. I just wanted you to hear it directly from me. Before James could respond, Brennan added, one more thing. There's a meeting tomorrow of your oversight committee, right? I'd like to attend to listen, if that's okay with you. After the call ended, James sat in stunned silence while Tanya peppered him with questions. Before he could answer any of them, his phone rang again. This time it was Thompson. Tell me you didn't just speak to Brennan, the attorney said without preamble. How did you know? James asked. Because his attorney just called me, livid that his client made unauthorized contact. James, please tell me you didn't agree to anything. He wants to attend the oversight committee meeting tomorrow, James said. That's all. Thompson sighed heavily. This is highly irregular. What's his angle? I'm not sure he has one, James replied. He sounded broken. The next morning brought more calls, more reporters at his door, and a formal letter from the district attorney's office requesting a meeting. James's face looked worse. The bruising had deepened to a dark purple that spread across his cheek and around his eye. But the pain had subsided to a dull throb, manageable with regular painkillers. You don't have to go to this committee meeting, Tanya said as she helped him adjust his tie. Everyone would understand if you took some time off. I need to be there, James insisted. Especially now. The City Hall meeting room was packed beyond capacity. The Civilian Police Oversight Committee normally conducted its business with little public attention, but today, news cameras lined the walls and every seat was filled. James's fellow committee members greeted him with solemn handshakes and concerned questions about his health. The committee chair, Dr. Loretta Washington, called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the events of the past few days, she said, nodding toward James. Our colleague has experienced firsthand what many in our community have long feared. His courage in the aftermath has been remarkable. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. James nodded in acknowledgement, then glanced toward the door as it opened. Michael Brennan slipped in, alone and dressed in civilian clothes. He took a seat in the back corner, drawing whispers and stares from those nearby. The meeting proceeded with its usual agenda, reviewing policy proposals, discussing training recommendations, examining data on police stops and arrests. But the tension in the room was palpable, the discussion more urgent and pointed than usual. When they reached the public comment period, Dr. Washington announced, "We have a request to speak from former Officer Michael Brennan." The room erupted in whispers and exclamations. Dr. Washington raised her hand for silence. "This is unusual, but given the circumstances, I'm inclined to allow it, unless any committee members object." She looked directly at James, every head turned toward him. James met Brennan's gaze across the room, seeing the same fear and uncertainty he'd glimpsed in the aftermath of their encounter. After a long moment, he shook his head. No objection. Brennan walked slowly to the podium. Up close, James could see the toll the past days had taken, the dark circles under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted the microphone. "Thank you for allowing me to speak," Brennan began, his voice hoarse. "I'm not here to defend myself or ask for my job back. I'm here because I think you need to hear from someone who was part of the problem." For the next 10 minutes, Brennan spoke with brutal honesty about the unwritten rules and hidden culture within certain units of the police department. He described how new officers were socialized to see the community as adversaries rather than people to protect, how complaints were systematically buried, how the us versus them mentality was reinforced daily in 1,000 small ways. "It starts with little things," he explained. "Jokes in the locker room, stories about problem neighborhoods, warnings about being too soft. Before you know it, you're seeing threats everywhere and forgetting the people you're supposed to serve are just that, people." As Brennan spoke, James watched his fellow committee members taking furious notes. This was insider information they'd been trying to access for months, the kind of testimony that could drive real change. "The night after I hit Mr. Wilson, I couldn't sleep," Brennan continued, his voice cracking. "I kept seeing his face, kept hearing my mother asking me what kind of man I'd become, and I realized I didn't recognize myself anymore." He looked directly at James. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking you to use what happened to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." When the meeting ended, reporters swarmed both James and Brennan, shouting questions and thrusting microphones forward. Security staff created a buffer, allowing the committee members to exit through a side door. In a small conference room away from the cameras, James found himself face to face with Brennan again. This time there were no badges or uniforms between them, just two men, one still bearing the physical marks of the other's actions. "Thank you," Brennan said quietly, "for letting me speak." "Your testimony will help," James replied. "But it's just a start. I know. I've been thinking about what else I can do." Brennan hesitated. "The DA offered me a deal. Plead guilty to assault, serve some community service, maybe probation, no jail time." "That seems light," James said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "It is," Brennan agreed. "That's why I turned it down." James blinked in surprise. "You turned down a plea deal?" "I told them I'll plead guilty, but I want the judge to decide the sentence. No special treatment." Brennan ran a hand through his hair. "And I've been thinking about what comes after. Maybe there's a way I can use this experience, speaking to academy classes, working with community groups. I don't know if anyone would want to hear from me, but they might," James said slowly, considering the possibilities. A first-hand account of how the system fails, both the community and the officers themselves, that could be powerful. As they talked, the outlines of an unexpected collaboration began to take shape. Not friendship. The injury between them was too raw for that. But a shared purpose born from their painful intersection. Dr. Washington knocked on the door, poking her head in. "James, the chief is here with the mayor. They want to discuss implementing some of our proposals immediately, using emergency funding." James nodded, then turned back to Brennan. "I have to go." "I understand," Brennan said. "But if you're willing, I'd like to continue this conversation." Maybe what happened between us could be a catalyst for something important. As James walked toward the meeting that might finally bring the changes he'd been advocating for months, he felt the weight of the moment. His face still bore the marks of injustice, but perhaps those marks could become signs of transformation, not just for him and Brennan, but for the community they both called home. He paused at the door, looking back at Brennan. "I'm not ready to forgive you yet," he said honestly, "but I am ready to work with you. If you're serious about making amends." Brennan nodded solemnly. "More serious than I've ever been about anything in my life. I've written part 4 of the story, which focuses on the direct interaction between James and Brennan following their phone call. This section explores the complexity of accountability, redemption, and the potential for systemic change. The narrative shows Brennan taking responsibility for his actions beyond what's required of him legally, while James struggles with how to respond to this apparent transformation. I've developed the Oversight Committee meeting as a pivotal moment where personal pain begins to transform into potential policy change. This part builds on the themes established earlier while adding new dimensions to both main characters. It shows how their unexpected connection might become a catalyst for broader reform, setting up the final part of the story where we'll see the longer-term impact of these events. "Thank you all for coming," James began, looking out at the packed room. Journalists, community activists, police officers, city officials, all were gathered for the official launch of the Community Police Accountability Initiative. "When I was assaulted 3 months ago, I never expected to be standing here today. I was angry. I wanted justice. But what I've come to realize is that true justice isn't just about punishment. It's about creating lasting change." In the front row, Tanya gave him an encouraging nod. Beside her sat Thompson, who had become not just James's attorney but a key architect of the initiative's legal framework. And at the end of the row was Michael Brennan, dressed in a suit rather than a uniform, his expression solemn and attentive. The journey to this moment had been neither straight nor easy. The district attorney had ultimately charged Brennan with assault, and true to his word, Brennan had pleaded guilty without seeking a plea deal. The judge, moved by Brennan's remorse and his commitment to reform, had sentenced him to 2 years probation, community service, and mandatory participation in the very initiative being launched today. "This program," James continued, "brings together community members, police officers, mental health professionals, and city officials to reimagine public safety from the ground up. We've already secured funding for de-escalation training, community engagement officers, and mental health response teams." He gestured toward a group of uniformed officers standing at the side of the room, "and I want to acknowledge the 23 officers who have voluntarily joined our training program, committing to being part of the solution." After James concluded his remarks, Dr. Washington took the podium to explain the initiative's structure and goals. As she spoke, James made his way to a side room where the program coordinators were gathered. Brennan was among them, reviewing materials for the Police Academy presentation scheduled for the following week. "Ready for this?" James asked, joining him at the table. Brennan looked up, the ghost of a smile crossing his face. "As ready as I'll ever be, though I still get looks from the cadets like I'm a cautionary tale." "You are," James said bluntly, "but you're also something else now." Their working relationship remained complicated. There were days when James couldn't look at Brennan without remembering the pain and humiliation of being struck to the ground. There were moments when the anger resurfaced, sharp and hot, but there were also times, increasingly frequent, when he saw beyond the man who had hit him to the man who was genuinely trying to make amends, not just to James, but to the community he had failed to serve properly. The door opened and Lieutenant Dawkins entered, now Captain Dawkins, following a promotion that had raised eyebrows given his connection to the case. But Dawkins had proven himself an unexpected ally, implementing policy changes within the department that went beyond the committee's recommendations. "The chief wants a word with both of you before the press conference," Dawkins said. "And there's someone else here you might want to meet." He stepped aside, revealing a young man in his 20s, his expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. "This is Andre Powell. He filed a complaint against Officer Reed last year for excessive force. It was dismissed, but with our new review process, we're reopening his case." James extended his hand. "Thank you for coming forward, Andre. That takes courage." Andre shook James's hand firmly. Your story gave me hope that maybe this time would be different." As they walked toward the chief's office, James noticed how Brennan held back slightly, his body language subdued in Andre's presence. There was recognition there, not of Andre specifically, but of what he represented. All the complaints that had been dismissed, all the people who hadn't had the benefit of video evidence and public outrage to support their claims. The afternoon unfolded in a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and presentations. The initiative was receiving national attention, with other cities expressing interest in adopting similar models. What had begun as a personal fight for justice had expanded into something far more significant. By evening, the formal events had concluded and James found himself sitting on a bench in the small park across from City Hall. The day's activities had left him drained but satisfied. Real change was happening, not as quickly as he might hope, but steadily, purposefully. He heard footsteps approaching and looked up to see Brennan, his tie loosened and jacket slung over his shoulder. "Mind if I join you?" Brennan asked. James gestured to the empty space beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as city workers took down the banners and signs from the day's event. "My mother asked about you," Brennan said finally. "She wanted to know if you'd be willing to come to dinner sometime." James raised an eyebrow. "That might be a bit much, don't you think?" Brennan chuckled softly. "That's what I told her. She says I'm not trying hard enough to make amends." "You're doing all right," James admitted. "That speech you gave to the community forum last week, it reached people. I could see it in their faces." "It's the least I can do," Brennan said, his expression growing serious. "You know, before all this happened, I never thought about the impact of my actions. Not really. I just did my Joe. Collected my paycheck, went home. Now I can't stop thinking about it. About all the people I might have hurt without even realizing it." "That's called growth," James said. "Painful but necessary." A group of teenagers walked by laughing and talking loudly. One of them recognized James and nudged his friends. They approached cautiously. "You're that guy, right? The one who got hit by the cop?" A tall boy in a basketball jersey asked. James nodded. "That's me." "Man, that was messed up," the boy said. "But what you're doing now, my uncle's a cop, and he says things are actually changing at the station because of you." The boy's gaze shifted to Brennan, his expression hardening slightly. "And you're the officer, right?" Brennan met his gaze steadily. "Former officer. But yes, that was me." The teenager studied him for a long moment. "My mom says it takes guts to admit when you're wrong, especially in public." After the teenagers moved on, Brennan let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. "That happens a lot. People recognize me, have something to say. Get used to it," James advised. "The story isn't just about us anymore. It belongs to the community now." As darkness fell and streetlights flickered on, they continued talking. About the initiative, about the changes already taking place, about the challenges still to come. They were not friends in the traditional sense. The circumstances of their connection were too fraught for that. But they had formed something perhaps more meaningful. A partnership forged in pain but dedicated to prevention. Tanya found them there an hour later, deep in conversation about the new training protocols. "There you are," she said. "Everyone's headed to Riverside Cafe to celebrate. You coming?" James glanced at Brennan, a silent question in his eyes. "I should probably head home," Brennan said, rising from the bench. "It's been a long day." "No," James said, surprising himself. "You should come. You helped build this too." Brennan hesitated, uncertainty written across his face. "Are you sure? Not everyone will be comfortable with me there." "Maybe not," James acknowledged. "But that's part of the process too. Learning to be uncomfortable, to have difficult conversations, to sit with complicated truths." As they walked toward the cafe where the rest of the team waited, James reflected on the strange path that had brought them here. 3 months ago, he had been face down on the pavement, tasting blood and feeling the sting of injustice. Now he was helping to reshape the very system that had failed him. It wasn't a perfect ending. There was still so much work to be done, so many ingrained attitudes to change, so many structural issues to address. But it was a beginning, a real one, built on honest acknowledgement of harm and genuine commitment to repair. The cafe was bright and warm, filled with the voices of people who had come together across divides that once seemed unbridgeable. As James held the door open for Brennan to enter, He saw the former officer square his shoulders, preparing to face whatever reception awaited him inside. It was a small gesture of courage, but it reminded James of something his grandmother used to say. Healing happens one step at a time, one day at a time, one brave choice at a time. And perhaps that was the most important lesson of all. That transformation, whether personal or societal, begins not with grand gestures but with individual choices to face hard truths and do the difficult work of change. For James and Brennan, for the police department and the community it served, that work was just beginning. But for the first time in a long time, it felt possible. I've written the final part of the story, set 3 months after the events of Part 4. This conclusion shows the lasting impact of the incident through the launch of a formal police reform initiative that James and Brennan have both helped create. The narrative explores the complex relationship that has developed between the two men. Not friendship, but a meaningful partnership built around creating positive change. I've shown how James has moved from seeking personal justice to working for systemic reform, while Brennan continues to take responsibility for his actions and works to help others avoid similar mistakes. This final part brings resolution while acknowledging that true change is an ongoing process. The story concludes with a hopeful but realistic tone, showing that while healing and reconciliation are possible, they require continuous effort and commitment from all involved.